After studying this module, you shall be able to explore the factors affecting consumption decisions of households, understand the behavior of consumption as explained by the Keynesian theory, understand the behavior of consumption as explained by the life cycle hypothesis, understand the behavior of consumption as explained by permanent income theory, be familiar with consumption under conditions of liquidity constraints and myopia. Understand the Ricardian equivalence proposition. The Keynesian framework includes consumption, investment, government expenditure and net exports as the components of aggregate demand. The first two are the demand components that arise from the private sector. The present module attempts to discuss one of the most important components of aggregate demand, viz. Consumption. This is considered to be one of the most stable components of GDP compared to investment, which is quite unstable. There are several theories that attempt to explain the consumption behavior of individuals. For instance, one of the early theories by J.M. Keynes explained aggregate consumption behavior in terms of the psychological law of consumption, wherein consumption is seen as a function of current income. Later theories of consumption, such as the life cycle hypothesis and the permanent income theory, have provided alternative explanations of consumption behavior. These theories built on the Keynesian law of consumption that continues to be relevant even today. These theories suggest that consumption expenditure is more likely to depend on an individual's lifetime income rather than a short-term, temporary or transitory changes in income. Both these theories identify similar points and are often used together because of their similarities. This module discusses the theories of consumption patterns of the individuals. First, we will discuss what consumption is. Consumption expenditure includes consumer spending on durable products such as automobiles, computers, etc., as well as non-durable consumption goods like food and beverages, clothing, etc., as well as services including health, transport and education, both on domestic as well as foreign produce. Now, we will discuss the factors that affect consumption. Consumption decisions depend on a number of factors such as current income. The relationship between consumption and current income is captured by the Keynesian absolute income hypothesis. Keynes suggested a positive relation between consumption and current income. As income rises, so does consumption. This is a movement along the consumption curve that depicts the relation between consumption and income. Change in the factors other than the income mentioned above result in a shift of the consumption curve. Household wealth. Wealth of a household comprises property, cars, savings, bonds, cash as well as human wealth. The higher the accumulated wealth, higher would be the likely consumption expenditure. Example, a fall in stock prices results in a decline in wealth and hence may induce a fall in consumption. This results in a downward shift of the consumption curve. Price levels. An increase in price levels reduces the real income as well as the wealth of the households. As a result, the consumers are likely to reduce their spending. Rate of interest. A change in the rate of interest sets in operation two effects. substitution effect and the income effect. Substitution effect works to reduce consumption and hence raise savings in case of a rise in interest rate. A higher rate of interest results in less spending on items purchased on credit, such as automobiles or consumer durables such as washing machines, refrigerators, etc. But the income effect due to rise in interest income works to increase consumption and hence reduces savings. The actual impact of the change in interest rate on consumption will depend upon the relative strengths of the substitution as well as the income effect. The substitution effect is likely to be stronger at low income levels, while the income effect is likely to be stronger at higher income levels. The last factor is future expectations regarding income, price and rate of interest. The consumption levels are likely to be affected by consumers' expectations regarding several indicators such as income, price or rate of interest. The consumption expenditure is assumed to depend positively upon future increases in income. For example, expectation of getting a good job in the future may increase consumption levels today. On the contrary, fear of losing a job, perhaps due to a recession in the economy, might reduce consumption expenditures even before the job loss takes place. An expectation of a rise in price or rate of interest in near future might result in greater spending today. Now, we will discuss the Keynesian consumption theory. John Maynard Keynes, in his General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, published in 1936, introduced the concept of consumption function that remains relevant today. The consumption function captures the relationship between aggregate consumption and aggregate income in any period t in an economy. The Keynesian consumption function may be expressed as Ct is equal to A plus Byt, wherein A is greater than 0 and B lies between 0 and 1. The intercept A is the level of consumption at 0 income levels. This is also referred to as autonomous consumption, as it does not depend on the level of income. The slope coefficient B is the increase in consumption that is associated with a unit increase in income. B is popularly referred to as the marginal propensity to consume or MPC. This figure presents the consumption function depicting the relationship between consumption, that is on the y-axis, and income, which is on the x-axis. The linear consumption function C shows that consumption increases with income, assuming other things remaining constant. This is also referred to as the absolute income hypothesis, as consumption is directly related to income and nothing else. The significance of MPC can be discussed as the different consumption theories differ in respect of the significance of MPC. In Keynesian theory, change in income has a significant impact on consumption, so that the MPC is quite significant. However, in contrast, the more recent works on studying consumption behavior have suggested a relatively smaller role of MPC. These theories may also be considered more advanced on the grounds that they distinguish between the MPC that arises out of a short-term rise in income, such as due to working overtime or a festival bonus. A permanent increase in income, example, a permanent increase in salary due to promotion, and an increase in wealth. These theories suggest that in the case of a transitory increase in income, the MPC is low, while in the case of a permanent increase in income, MPC may be quite high. One of the theories of consumption is life cycle hypothesis. Life cycle hypothesis was formulated by Franco Modigliani. The hypothesis is based on the belief that a consumer would like to iron out fluctuations and maintain stability in consumption and hence in the average standard of living. In other words, the life cycle hypothesis views an individual as a rational consumer who would allocate his consumption over his lifetime in such a manner that he is able to even out or smoothen out his consumption over his complete lifetime. This is how most of us would like to live. Rather than incurring very high consumption in one period and tolerating very low consumption in another period. Since a consumer plans over his working life horizon, he is able to consume even after his retirement or even leave some assets for his children as bequests. This is possible only by saving and building assets in the periods of high income. According to the life cycle hypothesis, people in young age group are more in debt, that is, taken mainly to complete their education or to build their homes. Over time, they are able to save more and build assets. In the old age, they dis-save so that by the end of their lifetimes, they have little assets left unless they want to leave a huge bequest. For example, suppose a professor starts working at age 25. Assume his age of retirement is 65. Further, the life expectancy calculations make us believe that he is likely to live until the age 85. Now, if he earns an annual income of rupees 12 lakhs, his total income over his entire lifetime will be 40 multiplied by 12 lakh. His total working period is calculated as age of retirement less the age at which he starts working, that is 65 minus 25, which will be 40 years. The total number of years or total period the professor lives, which is working plus non-working retirement years, would be 60. To smoothen his consumption, the professor would require to spend his total consumption expenditure equally across these 60 years. To get that, we divide his total lifetime income with 60 and we get 7 lakhs. The professor would like to make a stable consumption expenditure of 7 lakh each year. For doing so, he must save the remaining amount 5 lakh every year till he reaches 65. To generalize, the life cycle hypothesis suggests consumption each year would be consumption C is equal to the working period divided by the total period, which is multiplied by the annual income. In the expression above, WP by TP can be seen as the marginal propensity to consume. This can be graphically examined. The figure presents this hypothesis. Consumption is assumed to be a constant throughout the lifetime, say C. The professor is able to save during the working period of his life, that is, till the age 65, which is denoted by WP in the figure. Till this time period, he saves and builds his assets, which is shown by the assets curve, which is maximum at the age 65. This is required to sustain his consumption during the non-working period. After this, the individual will have to sell off his assets to maintain his consumption of C till he lives, that is, till age 85. During the period TL minus WP, he begins selling his assets in such a way that nearing the end of his life, the assets almost reach zero. In this example, the professor does not leave a bequest for his children. This can again be seen by the downward slope of the assets curve after the age 65. Now, this example can be extended by computing the MPC out of different kinds of incomes, that is, permanent or transitory. Now, assume that there is a permanent increase in professor's income by rupees 50,000 per year. His new annual income will be rupees 12,50,000. Accordingly, the new higher level of consumption can be computed as 12,50,000 multiplied by 40 divided by 60, which is equal to 8,33,333 and 30 paisa. Clearly, this is higher than the initial consumption expenditure level of rupees 7 lakh. The consumption rises by rupees 33,333 and 30 paisa. In this case, the marginal propensity to consume is 40 divided by 60, which is equal to 0.67. Now, let us consider another case wherein rupees 50,000 increase in income is transitory, that is, only for this particular year. In this case, consumption expenditure will increase by 50,000 divided by 60, which is 833 rupees and 33 paisa only. The MPC in this case is 1 divided by 60. which is equal to 0.17. Thus, it can be clearly seen with the help of this example that marginal propensity to consume and hence the change in consumption expenditure out of a transitory increase in income is very low as compared to that out of a permanent increase in income. Similar to a transitory increase in income, an increase in wealth may also result in small change in consumption in any particular period as it will be spread over the rest of his lifetime. This implies that MPC may be low. Now, we will discuss the permanent income hypothesis. The permanent income theory was formulated by Milton Friedman. It is based on the hypothesis that a consumer would make an estimate of his future income earned over the entire lifetime and then make his consumption decisions. He would prefer to smoothen his consumption rather than living in luxury in one period and living in poverty in the other. In this sense, the underlying idea behind this theory is quite similar to that of the life cycle hypothesis. In fact, due to their similarity, many researchers club these theories and refer to them jointly. Permanent income theory asserts that consumption is positively and proportionately related to permanent income. Symbolically, C is equal to small c y dp. This equation suggests that consumption is directly related to permanent disposable income of the consumer. Similar to the life cycle hypothesis, the permanent income theory distinguishes between a temporary or a transitory increase in income. These theories are used as a tool by neoclassical economists to point to the weak relation between consumption and current income and hence the lack of effectiveness of the stabilization policies. They are used to argue that a transitory increase in income from sources such as transfer benefits to the unemployed or a temporary tax cut may fail to increase consumption expenditures significantly. Accordingly, these are likely to provide little boost to the economy. Similarly, one period taxation may not be able to curtail consumption in periods of inflation. The life cycle hypothesis and the permanent income theory may not appropriately explain consumption behavior due to two reasons: borrowing constraints and the myopic nature of the consumers. Borrowing constraints. The permanent income theory asserts that a consumption decision is based on the long-term permanent income of the consumer. Consider a student who has little current income. However, he expects to earn a very high future income. As per the permanent income theory, he should make high consumption expenditure today. This may be possible only if he is able to borrow. However, he may not be able to maintain this high level of consumption expenditure if he is unable to obtain a loan due to lack of collateral or very high borrowing rates of interest on such loans. Such borrowing constraints or the liquidity constraints may prevent higher consumption expenditures even if the student intends to spend more based on his permanent income. This may be an important reason why the view that current consumption is more dependent on current income rather than permanent income finds greater support in the empirical literature. It provides support to the Keynesian absolute income hypothesis. Myopia. Consumers may be short-sighted and may not believe in any announcement of future increase in income till it actually happens. Liquidity constraints also explain why consumers may not be able to increase consumption till the income actually increases. The life cycle and the permanent income theories can be further formalized to include income earned under the situations of uncertainty. That is, these theories have been extended to analyze how a consumer responds to surprises or shocks to incomes. However, research shows that consumption is more sensitive to current income due to reasons discussed above rather than unanticipated changes in income. Now, we will discuss about the efficacy of fiscal policy. A fall in taxation may not be able to raise consumption expenditure and hence stimulate the economy. This could be because a rational and forward-looking consumer may understand that a tax cut today with government expenditure unchanged will adversely affect fiscal deficit and raise the level of public debt. Accordingly, he is able to figure out that the government might have to resort to a rise in tax in the next period to service the higher debt. He has to pay interest plus repay the principal. It is assumed that the government will cut its spending in the next period to service the debt. Based on this understanding, he might not increase his consumption today. Thus, a change in current taxation is unlikely to alter the consumption levels. This is referred to as the Ricardian equivalence or Barrow equivalence proposition, named after the economists David Ricardo and Robert Barrow. Keynesians criticize the result on Ricardian equivalence based on two facts. Firstly, a consumer, given his myopic nature, may fail to understand the complete implications of a tax cut in the current period. Secondly, as discussed earlier, due to borrowing constraints or the liquidity constraints, current income might better explain current consumption rather than the permanent lifetime income. Accordingly, equivalence may fail to hold. Liquidity constrained persons may choose to raise their spending when their disposable income goes up following a tax cut. In developing countries like India, the borrowing constraints are often quite high due to lack of proper financial markets, thereby making these modern theories less relevant in such contexts. Empirically too, the Keynesian theory of consumption has found greater support. Household final consumption expenditure is the total market value of all goods and services purchased by households for consumption purposes during a given period. Consumption accounts for a sizable proportion of GDP in most countries. Current income, rate of interest, expectations about the future price levels, and wealth are some of the important determinants of households' consumption decision. Keynes' consumption function shows a relationship between current consumption and current income in an economy. The life cycle hypothesis views an individual as a rational consumer who would allocate his consumption over his lifetime in such a manner that he is able to even out or smoothen out his consumption over his complete lifetime. The marginal propensity to consume out of a transitory increase in income is low as compared to that of a permanent increase in income. Similar to an increase in transitory income, an increase in wealth will be distributed as higher consumption over the entire lifetime, and the boost in consumption in any particular period may be low, implying a low MPC. The permanent income theory asserts that a consumer would make an estimate of his future income earned over his entire lifetime and then make his consumption decisions. The life cycle hypothesis and permanent income theory may not appropriately explain consumption behavior due to borrowing constraints and myopic nature of the consumers. Borrowing constraints or liquidity constraints imply that higher consumption expenditures may not happen even if a consumer intends to spend more based on his permanent income. A change in current taxation is unlikely to alter consumption levels if rational agents believe that tax levels are going to change in the future. This is known as the Ricardian equivalence or Barrow equivalence proposition.